All right, ready for a deep dive. Today, it's Leviticus, chapters 22 through 24, to be exact.
Yeah, those chapters, they're not exactly light reading, are they?
Definitely not the first place you'd go for a beach read, right? But that's why we're here. We're going past all those thou shalts to figure out what they tell us about the Israelites.
And you know what's really cool about these chapters is they give us this incredibly vivid picture of what mattered most to them. We're talking about holiness, not just as a concept, but like how it played out in their daily lives.
So more than just like washing your hands before dinner.
Way more. Think of it as this whole system, like ritual purity was woven into everything. Because for the Israelites, God was right there with them. And maintaining that purity, it was key for their relationship with God and with each other.
Okay, starting to see how this gets complex. So where does Leviticus chapter 22 fit in with all this? How does it set the stage?
Well, it starts with the priests, right? They're the ones in direct contact with the divine.
Makes sense. You can't just stroll up to the altar in any state. It's like showing up to meet the CEO in your pajamas. Not exactly protocol.
Exactly. But here, the stakes were even higher. The priests had to be super careful about ritual purity because what they did affected everyone. And Leviticus 22, it gets into the nitty-gritty of what could mess that up.
And it's not just the obvious stuff, right? Like, don't handle a dead body right before a sacrifice. Leviticus gets into some seriously specific situations.
It really does. It's fascinating. Like, even accidental contact with certain things, bodily fluids, skin conditions. You could even become ritually impure by touching someone else who'd touched something unclean. It could make a priest temporarily unable to do his duties.
Hold on, skin conditions. What are we talking about here?
Mm-hmm.
And how does that even relate to spiritual purity?
I know, right? It seems a little out there at first. Leviticus lists a few, like a festering rash or scabs. We're not entirely sure what those would be diagnosed as today, though. Back then, no microscopes, no modern medicine.
So they were working with what they could see. If there was a skin condition, maybe they thought it showed something was off balance, even if they didn't get the underlying cause.
You got it. Physical and spiritual health, they were all connected in their worldview. So even something that wasn't life-threatening, like a minor skin condition, could still mean someone wasn't ritually pure. And that meant they couldn't approach the divine.
That's such a different way of thinking about the body and, well, holiness than we do now.
Completely. And this idea comes up again and again throughout Leviticus 22. There's this phrase that pops up, I am the Lord who sanctifies you.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It's almost like a refrain echoing through the whole chapter.
Exactly. And it tells us what this whole system of ritual purity was really all about. It wasn't just hygiene. It was about this state of being set apart, dedicated to God. And that dedication had to be reflected in every part of their lives.
So sanctification, it's like God sets you apart, but you're also setting yourself apart for God.
Exactly. It goes both ways. And that's where holiness comes in. It's more than just being good in the way we might think of it now. It's about reflecting God's presence, striving to live in a way that honors that presence.
So every action matters. What they ate, how they worshiped, it was about being mindful, intentional, respecting that connection with God.
Precisely. All those little details about the holy food, who could eat it, when, what made someone ritually unclean, it all points back to that core belief. Holiness wasn't some abstract idea. It was woven into the very fabric of their lives. And this is where it gets really interesting because it wasn't just about each priest staying ritually pure on his own, right? It was about how the whole Israelite community was structured.
Okay, so how did these purity rules, how did they actually affect how people interacted day to day?
It's like these laws, they created these circles of holiness, almost like a target, with the priests right in the center. Then their families were in the next ring, and then it like radiated outward to the rest of the community.
A bullseye. So the closer you were to the center, the stricter those purity standards.
Exactly. And that wasn't just for religious stuff, it was their whole lives. Leviticus 22.013, that's a great example, a case study of how these rules played out in families. Like, what happens when a priest's daughter marries someone who's not a priest?
Oh, interesting. So even family ties, they weren't enough to override these laws.
Nope. If a priest's daughter marries outside that circle, she's no longer allowed to eat the holy food that's set aside for her father's household.
Wow, that's pretty major. It really shows how important ritual purity was to their whole social structure, right? Like their place in society.
Absolutely. But it's not about being cruel. It was about upholding this system, right? The Israelites, they believed it kept everything in balance, maintained their relationship with God.
So it's like, we still love you, but you made a choice stepped outside this boundary and there are consequences.
Yeah, exactly. And there's even some compassion there, too. Like, it says if she comes back to her father's house, maybe she's widowed or divorced, she gets those rights back, can eat the holy food again.
Oh, that's such an interesting detail. It's like they built in a safety net. They knew life happened. Circumstances could change.
It wasn't just about priests and their families either. Leviticus 22 also talks about what happens when a regular person, not a priest, accidentally eats the holy food.
I'm picturing someone wandering into the wrong tent at a dinner party or something, taking a bite before they realize.
It could happen. So if someone eats the holy food without realizing, they have to give the priest an offering. Like, add a fifth of the food's value on top of what they ate. It's a way to make things right.
So it wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoring things, keeping that ritual pure and set apart, even when someone messed up.
Exactly. And that leads us to another fascinating piece of Leviticus 22. The rules about animal sacrifices.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't like you could just show up with any old sheep or goat. Right. Leviticus 22.1725, it gets so specific about the animals. They had to be perfect, no blemishes, blind, fractured, maimed. It even says a wart, a festering rash, or scabs. It's like the ancient livestock inspection checklist.
Right. It's easy to laugh now, imagining priests inspecting every single animal. But that focus on physical perfection, it had a deeper meaning.
Okay, so what was the reason behind it? Were they just trying to give God the best of the best?
It's bigger than that. Think about it. Back then, livestock. That was everything. Wealth, food, livelihood, the whole works.
So offering an animal with no flaws, it was like saying, this is the absolute best we have, God. We're giving you our most valuable things.
Exactly. It showed their devotion. They were acknowledging that God was in charge, even over their most prized possessions. Those animals, they were a symbol of the Israelites' commitment, their thankfulness.
Makes you think about what we consider sacrifices today, right?
Yeah.
If they really hold that same weight. But there's a twist, isn't there? Leviticus 22.23, it gives an exception to the perfect animal rule. An animal with a deformed limb, it could be used for a voluntary offering, but not for a vow. Why the difference?
People miss that detail. It's so important. It's about intention. See, a voluntary offering, that was spontaneous, coming from the heart. It was about gratitude, wanting to be close to God. But a vow, that's different. That was serious, a binding promise, often made in times of need.
So for a vow, you had to bring your A game, no exceptions. But a voluntary offering, maybe a little imperfection, was okay.
You got it. It's like God wasn't looking for flawless sacrifices. Not really. It was the heart behind it that mattered.
That adds a whole other layer to those sacrifices, doesn't it? It wasn't just checking boxes, following rules without thinking. It was the sincerity that mattered, the reason why they were doing it.
Exactly. And that focus on the why, it's something we see throughout Leviticus.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, ritual purity, the priesthood, even all those rules about sacrifices. But Leviticus, it's not just about rules, is it? Chapter 23, it's like stepping into this ancient calendar. And the Israelites, they knew how to celebrate.
They sure did. And these weren't just any parties. We're talking festivals ordained by God, woven right into their history, their identity as a people. Every single one, it told a story, marked a sacred time, a way to connect more deeply with God and with each other.
It wasn't just about the days and the seasons. It was about keeping those important memories alive. Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Day of Atonement, each one a powerful way to remember.
Close your eyes for a second. Imagine you're back in ancient Israel. It's Passover. Families are gathering for the Seder. They're not just remembering leaving Egypt. They're tasting it in the bitter herbs, feeling it in that unleavened bread, passing that story down through generations, bringing history to life.
So it's a whole experience, right?
Well,
engaging all the senses, not just remembering, but really feeling what happened in the past.
Exactly. And it wasn't all serious and somber either. Like the Feast of Booths, Leviticus 23.3343 describes it. Sounds like it was a blast. They'd build these little huts, booths, out of branches and leaves, live in them for a whole week, a reminder of their time in the wilderness after they escaped Egypt.
I can just picture it. Families together in those makeshift shelters, sharing meals, telling stories under the stars.
Yeah.
Like a week-long camping trip with this deep spiritual meaning.
And the palm branches, the singing, those amazing meals, it was pure joy. Celebrating their freedom, thanking God for providing for them, acknowledging, yeah, we depend on you for everything.
It's amazing how those festivals, they brought everything together, their history, their faith, even their relationship with the land. Celebrating the harvest, recognizing God's hand in providing for them.
Absolutely. And then we get to Leviticus 24. It's a real mixed bag this time. instructions for the lamp in the tabernacle, this shocking story about blasphemy, and then, well, we can't not talk about the eye for an eye principle.
Look, that's quite a shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
But even with these different topics, that theme of holiness, it's still there. Like that story about the blasphemer, Leviticus 24.9016. It might seem harsh to us now, but it shows just how much reverence the Israelites had for God's name.
It shows how sacred that covenant with God was to them. Speaking against God's name, it wasn't just an insult. It was like attacking the core of their whole society.
And then there's that phrase everyone thinks they get, an eye for an eye. It's so often used to justify revenge.
Yeah.
But that's missing a lot of the nuance, right?
Totally. The real meaning of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, Leviticus 24.1922, it was actually revolutionary for its time. Think about it. Back then, tribal feuds, going overboard with revenge, it was normal. This principle, it was actually meant to limit violence, make sure the punishment fit the crime, that's it, nothing more, nothing less.
So it's about fairness, about preventing those cycles of violence from spiraling out of control.
Yeah.
In a way, it was a step towards justice, not away from it.
Exactly. It reminds us that we can't just impose our modern ideas onto this ancient culture. They had a different way of seeing things, different values.
Well said. We've really dug deep into Leviticus chapters 22 through 24 today. What would you say are the main takeaways for our listeners?
These chapters, they give us this incredibly detailed, nuanced picture of how the Israelites saw the world. We've seen how their idea of holiness, it wasn't just some abstract idea, it was woven into everything. The food, the sacrifices, how they interacted with each other, even how they understood justice.
Even those rules and regulations that seem a little obscure to us now, they came from a place of deep faith, a belief system that shaped who they were, both as individuals and as a people.
Absolutely. And yes, some of it might seem strange now, even confusing, but when we dig into the why, we get a glimpse into what made this whole civilization tick.
It's been amazing exploring these chapters with you today, getting past those surface level readings. Hopefully our listeners have come away not just knowing what these laws were, but really understanding why they mattered so much to the Israelites.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.